Hi, I'm Mandy, and welcome to my channel. So at this point, you're probably well aware that the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U eShops are going to be closing next Monday. But before that happens, I wanted to hop on real quick and talk about an aspect of this issue that is particularly troubling to me. Now, I've seen a lot of people talking about digital exclusives, but something that's important to note is that PAL Regions actually missed out on a good handful of physical releases that did come out in America. Which means that our systems are about to completely lose access to a bunch of games that you might not even have on your radar. Unlike its predecessor, the 3DS is region-locked, so these games are essentially going to disappear for us, through any official channels anyway. I know there are a lot of games that did get physical releases that have become so expensive they're essentially unattainable anyway, but I still think it's worth highlighting these games we missed out on, because I think there's something to be said about losing the option altogether. And frankly, I'm bitter about it. So let's get into it. So we'll start this list by going over some of the 3DS exclusive titles. The first game I'd like to talk about is Jake Hunter: Ghost of the Dusk. This is a mystery visual novel starring Jake Hunter, who you might know from some of his DS titles. It's a really interesting game, but one that we unfortunately never got in Australia. I didn't even know it existed until I went to the US and happened to stumble upon it at a game store. And I'm really thankful that I did. There really aren't a lot of visual novels on the 3DS, and even less that are available physically. I really enjoyed this game. If you like detective stories, I definitely think it's worth checking out before the store closes. So this next one you might already be aware of because it is one of the more popular games we missed out on, and that is Shin Megami Tensei 4. If you're unfamiliar, SMT is a series of turn-based RPGs developed by Atlus. They have stories that tend to lean on the darker side and are generally pretty strong games. I haven't played 4 yet, but it's got great reviews and is commonly regarded as one of the best RPGs on the system. I was definitely disappointed that we didn't get the physical version. And on that note, even though we did get SMT4 Apocalypse physically, the PAL version is wildly expensive today. So if you're interested, I'd probably go and grab that one while you're at it too. The next game on the list is Langrisser Reincarnation Tensei, which is a tactical RPG that was published by Axis. It's actually the latest game in the Langrisser series, not counting the recent remakes of the first 2 games. I'll be honest with you, I've heard mostly bad things about this title, but it's one that I personally care about because the music was done by my favourite composer, Noriyuki Iwadare. He's the composer behind the Grandia series, Lunar, and also a good handful of Ace Attorney games, just to name a few things. His music has really inspired me and guided me throughout my life, so for that reason, I knew I didn't want to pass up on this game. Despite the criticisms, there are fans of the game out there, so it might be worth at least looking into, especially if you're a fan of Fire Emblem and those kinds of games. Another game we didn't receive is Return to Papa LaCroix: A Story of Seasons Fairy Tale. So, as the name implies, this game is a crossover between Story of Seasons and the Papa LaCroix franchise, which I don't think is as big here as it is in Japan, but you might recognize it from the PSP game that was released back in 2005. This game is a somewhat light-hearted farming sim RPG. Maybe not the best on the system, but it does seem to have favourable reviews, so it might be worth checking out. The next game is Lord of Magna: Made in Heaven, which is a strategy RPG with some dating sim elements. Again, I didn't even know of the existence of this game until a few years ago. I haven't played enough of it to be able to tell you whether I think it's worth it or not. Some people call it a hidden gem, but it seems like the more popular consensus is that it's lacking in a lot of areas. It seems like the main thing it has going for it is the battle system, which is pretty fun, but you might want to look at a more comprehensive review before making a decision. These next 2 games aren't 3DS exclusives, so the fact that we'll be losing them isn't as big of a deal, but I still think they're worth noting. The first is Rune Factory 4. This was ported to the Switch in 2020 and is now available digitally on PS4, Xbox, and PC, but I still think there's something really charming about the original release. Up to this point, all of the core numbered Rune Factory games were exclusive to the DS family of consoles. That said, there is extra content in the new release, so I think whether or not the 3DS game is worth it really comes down to how attached you are to the system. Another game we missed out on is Corpse Party. So Corpse Party is a horror adventure game that's been around for a while now. When the 3DS version was released, I believe it was considered the most definitive version of the game, but since then, a new version was released on all modern consoles. This remaster was actually the version of the game I played, and I thought it was really good. So for that reason, I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend the 3DS version, but it's definitely something to think about. And now I'd like to move on to a few bonus games. So the reason I'm counting this next one as a bonus on this list is because it's unfortunately already been delisted, which means that there is officially no way to purchase this game on a PAL system. And that really hurts me, because that game is Zero Time Dilemma, the final installment of the Zero Escape trilogy. There's a lot of history behind the release of Zero Time Dilemma, which I don't really have time to get into right now, but just know that for Zero Escape fans, this game was a huge deal. So I was devastated that Australia didn't get a physical release. There is a silver lining, and that is that it was also released on the PS Vita, which is region-free. And a few years later, they also brought it to PS4 and PC. So there are still lots of options for both physical and digital purchases of the game. But I still think it's really disappointing that, even though this series started out as a DS exclusive, it's impossible to purchase the last game on a PAL DS. I'm the kind of person who prefers to keep the games in my series contained to the same platforms where I can. The second game, Virtue's Last Reward, was also cross-platform, and I opted for the 3DS version because for some reason it felt important to me to continue the story in that same family of systems. It's actually the reason I got a 3DS. It was the first game I ever played on it, and remains my favourite game for the system. I did end up playing Zero Time Dilemma on the Vita, solely because it was available on that digital storefront first, and I wasn't going to waste any time waiting for it. I have to emphasize that this was my most anticipated game ever. I can't deny that it hurt my heart a little to have to conclude the series away from my DS, but from the beginning so much was going against it. Region locking plus no physical, slow store updates, and then to round out my disappointments we had the early delisting of the game. I apologise that this turned into a bit of a rant, but I've been upset about the way this release was handled since 2016, and I think of all the games Australia missed out on, this one hurt the most. The last two games I want to talk about today are actually eShop exclusives in America as well, which I know kind of goes against the point of this video, but while we're talking about the 3DS, I feel like I need to give a final reminder that we're all about to lose the last two Ace Attorney games. This is another thing that cuts me very deep. Ace Attorney is one of my favourite series, so it's been really sad for me to see what's been happening to these games. I am hoping that they'll bring them to the Switch one day. I feel like there's a decent possibility that will happen, especially with the unexpected release of Chronicles back in 2021. I don't want to believe that they'd let two mainline games just die in the West, but you never know. I'll continue to hold out hope for the future of the Ace Attorney series, but I really do encourage you to pick up each of these games if you like Ace Attorney, or if you're interested in getting into it. It's a fantastic visual novel adventure series, and it definitely deserves a better fate than this. So that was my list of 8 games that got physical releases in America but not Australia, and 2 games that didn't get one in either, which I am very sad to see disappear. If you're from a PAL territory, I hope you found this video somewhat useful. And if you're NTSC, I hope it was at least interesting to see some of the differences in game releases between our countries. I hope everyone has been able to grab all the games they want off the eShop. It's really sad to see it go, but it's definitely brought me a lot of wonderful memories over the years. I'd love to hear what everyone's favourite games are in the comments. It really is a system that has a wealth of fantastic games, and I'm glad that I still have a lot of them to look forward to. But that's all for today. I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you next time.